Good morning. That's reasonable. Now, I chose that title on purpose because there's different ways that you could play with it a little bit. That's reasonable. Oh, that's reasonable. I mean, we use expression like that quite a bit, don't we? There are times when we listen to something and we walk away from it saying, yeah, that sounded really good to me. He had good reasons. He made sense when he spoke. But there's also a way of using reason itself to help us move beyond our own limitations. And so to be a reasonable person means we see with the eyes of faith, and we let faith and reason work in conjunction. And from there, then, we can eventually arrive and understand who God is and the will of God. For the last couple of weeks, we've been kind of focusing on this. And if you recall, a couple of weeks ago when we started this series, there was an important parable that Jesus gave. And the parables are very important because parables are teaching things, but they're not meant only to just teach us something. They're formative in many ways because what they do is they can be expanded. How many times you've heard the same parable and something different jumps out at you? Or you're praying over a particular parable and suddenly you see it in a way you hadn't seen it before. That's Jesus' intent. He doesn't want you to just have to walk away from it and not keep growing and growing. And that's what the power of reason helps us to do. So if you remember, there was that wily steward who, last week wanted to get away with giving away his own money so he could have a comfortable life after he was fired. Or the two brothers, from the prodigal son story, the one brother in his reason, and he had clear reason, I'm just going to get my money now and go out and live a life that I've always wanted to live. I want to live this life of debauchery. I'm going to go out and I'm going to have the best food and the best prostitutes, and I'm going to just live like no other person. And the other brother, when he returned, who again had that same kind of reasonable attitude, how dare you give him a party? I've been here, I've slaved, I've done what I'm supposed to do. What did you do for me? Nothing. Sounds pretty reasonable. But yet neither one was using right reason. The steward wasn't using right reason. And today we get to what I want to call the pinnacle of the parables. When you heard today's parable, did you squirm at all? Because if you didn't squirm, you weren't listening with the ears of faith. Every time I read this parable, it smacks me hard. It smacks me real hard. And it should smack every one of us. That's what Jesus wanted to. We sometimes portray Jesus as this Mr. Nice that doesn't disturb anything, doesn't stir up anything, doesn't try to, make anything controversial. What he just said should stir up in us angst. Now, let's just spend some time reflecting on how society is today. We look around ourselves and we see so many things, and so many of you are out there. I know that. You come here pretty much just once a week. We spend a little time in prayer together, and then we send you back out into this world. But what's going on in this world, and should we be paying closer attention, especially through the process of reason? What is going on in this world? When we're surrounded by certain attitudes, when we're inundated with certain images, when we're told certain things over and over again, we tend to kind of take it on as reality. It must be true because they said it 400 times. Therefore, it is true, right? That's why I'll just keep repeating and keep repeating and keep repeating. There's a very, very good movie, you might remember it was made some time ago, that kind of exemplifies what I'm talking about. The movie was called God's Not Dead. I don't know if you remember. It was written by a Protestant. It's got a lot of Protestant overtones in it. But the point of it is this young college student who goes off to college, but he's a Christian. And he takes this one philosophy course with a professor who is clearly atheist and right from the beginning wants them to all write on a piece of paper and sign it so that he can just get past all the mythology and all this stuff. Just write, God is dead, and sign your name so we can move on. Now, you pay a lot of money to go off to college, and here's a professor that would take your child and make them a non-believer right from the very get-go. And then he's going to spend the rest of the course of trying to, teach them that there is no God. Live your life as if there is no God because there is no God. But this young man stands strong and fights back. And through a very reasonable process, gets the entire class by the end of the movie to accept Jesus Christ. By being faithful and reasonable, he was able to bring them out of this teacher's clutches and back into the hands of God. Now, I would venture to say most of us here probably are never going to have an audience of non-believers that you're going to have to try to convince about Jesus Christ. It's not the point of the movie. The point of the movie is we are surrounded by this attitude. The world wants you to not believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. The world wants you to believe there really is no heaven, there really is no hell. The world wants you to believe that even if you die, it's going to be okay because everything is wonderful. Don't worry about it. You can do all the sins you want. You can be out there fornicating. You can be an adulterer. You can be greedy. You can be stealing. You can be lying. Because you know what? In the end, it really doesn't make a difference because, well, it's not important. But it is important. See, as I said the first week, we have to remember faith and reason. We have to begin as men and women of faith. I talked about that back in August. I did a whole series on being faithful. We need to believe because as we profess, we believe in things that are visible and invisible, seen and unseen, and yet the world says if I can't see it, it doesn't exist. But it does. And we're people of faith. But faith without reason falls into superstition. It becomes just a blind thing where people are just acting out of impulse and out of superstition rather than being a real faithful person. And so we need reason. But reason without faith, as the expression goes, delves into nihilism. Nothing really is important. Nothing matters. Is that what we're seeing? We have a lot of reasonable people in our culture. There's a lot of reasonable people in government, a lot of reasonable people in the media. They give reasons for what they think and what they believe, and they want you to accept those reasons and live as they do. And if you don't, you know how it works. But we have to have both, because when both work in tandem, then we can pierce the veil that's over our eyes. We can see beyond the darkness and know that there is something else. So what have we seen in all of these parables that's the common thread? Self-centeredness, selfishness. The son wants all his money. I'm going to go out and live a life of debauchery. The son who stayed home. You know what? It's all about me. You didn't even take care of me. It's me. Take care of the steward last week. It's about me. I can't dig ditches. I'm not going to go get a job. I like being a steward. They gave me lots of money for this. And then today. If it doesn't make you uncomfortable, if it doesn't make you squirm, you didn't read it with the eyes of faith. What did I've listened to a lot of things already about this gospel for this weekend. I've listened to different people. And what do they all focus on? Charitable works. You have to give to the poor. Please, give to the poor, support the poor. I don't see this parable primarily about our responsibility to feed the poor. It's in there. But what is this parable predominantly about? It's about the rich man. Let's take him for a second. I ask you right now, what action did he do? What thing did he do that warranted to be condemned to hell? It's clear he's in hell. Jesus comes right out and says, he's in torment. What did he do? He was just living like anybody else in his culture. You know, I have wealth. I can be comfortable. Why should I care about anything? I've got enough food. I can dine sumptuously. How many of you dined sumptuously last night? I bet we all did. Had a good meal, sat down, well prepared, maybe a nice glass of wine. You know, we sit and we enjoy, we dine sumptuously. That's all this guy did. That's what we're told. Mind you, he stepped out of his house to have to step over a body that was laying there that probably, we can point to that. Is that what it was? See, sin is such. When we're surrounded by sinners who tell us that sin isn't real, that don't worry about it, you're not going to hell, it does affect us after a while. I'm sure that he was immersed in a circle of friends that kept affirming and kept affirming. You know what the psychologists call it? It's called rationalization. Now, I know you have met people who rationalize their behaviors. I say to you in all sincerity, There are tons and tons of people who like to come to confession and tell me all the reasons why they did something to make it seem like their sin wasn't so bad. But if you fornicated, it's still bad. I don't care what all the reasons were why you did it. It's unreasonable. It's not right reason to commit the sin of fornication. I've had people justify other actions trying to make it seem like it wasn't so bad, right? No, grave matter is grave matter. Yet we live in a culture that says, go ahead and shack up. Don't worry about marriage. You don't have to get married anymore. I mean, most of our young people don't come to church to get married anymore, if they get married at all. That's a culture that's dangerous. That's a culture that's lying to us. That's a culture that's not using right reason. But you're here. Are you a reasonable person? Are you a faithful person? Because both have to join together. And this rich man, and you know the irony to a lot of these parables are, they have no names. This is the first name we received, Lazarus, the one that went to heaven. It's the only name if you remember, what's the name of the two sons? We don't know. What was the name of the father that went out? We don't know. What was the name of the steward last week? We don't know. What was the name of the rich man? We don't know. But we know the name of Lazarus. And Lazarus was vindicated in eternal life. What did Lazarus do to warrant going to heaven? Just like I can say about the rich man. Did he say his prayers every day? We don't know. We're not told. Did he go to the temple regularly? We don't know. He did suffer. There might be something there. Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. He might be sending a little thing. You know, sometimes to get into heaven requires suffering. Let me ask any of you who truly care about somebody else. You have a child. You have a brother or sister. You have a friend that you see on a destructive path. And you want to help them. Are you going to put yourself first over them? Or are you going to try to help them? So parents, how many of you have actually had to suffer to help your child? Give up money to give them a better education. Give up some of the creature comforts that you have to make sure that they're well fed. How many of you have sat by a bedside of a child that was very sick, and it's not pleasant? There is a level of suffering that has to come through a reasonable process. Now, I'm not going to say that we need to suffer tremendously. We don't have to go out and put on hair shirts all the time. If you want to do that, let's talk. But there's going to be some suffering. And suffering is redemptive. And yet we walk around, especially, this is what our culture says, it's all about seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. That's what we hear all the time. It's about seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. And so, my dear brothers and sisters, is your life all about finding more pleasure? I have yet to find any person steeped in a deadly sin, and there are 7 of them, who doesn't live or have their whole universe revolve around their deadly sin. And you know what every deadly sin has at its heart? Pleasure. I mean, think of gluttony. What's it all about? That fine, sumptuous meal. And I know people who think about their next meal. They're eating breakfast. They're thinking about what they're having for lunch already. Gluttony doesn't mean that you got very fat. You know, the gluttonous person isn't that one that's always portrayed, like, you know, with the turkey leg in their hand, you know, gnawing away. Gluttony comes in so many different ways. The person of lust, somebody who's steeped in lust, all they're thinking about is how they can derive pleasure from somebody else, or from the internet, or from pornography, and they're just steeped in it. They're caught in it, and it's all about their next pleasure. The person that is greedy, I could go on. You see, you get the point. When we're steeped in it, we don't even see it. And the rich man was steeped in it to the point where he couldn't see the needs of a human being right at his doorstep. Couldn't see the needs of another. I can't imagine how he treated his brothers. We hear that they're just as bad as he was. But they all lived comfortably. And sometimes that comfort is what disturbs us. That first reading from Amos, that's the one that I always look at. They drink wine from bowls. Oh, you know. They laid comfortably on their couches. They're describing the lifestyle that we're told we should be avoiding. Now, I'm not going to say that having a comfortable chair, have your comfortable chair. Go ahead and watch your game. That's not the point. If that's all that's in your life, then we've got a problem. So here's my recommendation today, most especially today. You need a few more things. Number one, you need to stop thinking about yourself. So the next time you get into a conversation with somebody, next time you get into a disagreement with somebody, the next time you're feeling this compulsion because somebody's asking you for a favor, but you've already got in your mind that next time that starts to happen, stop yourself for a second and say, am I being selfish here? Am I being self-centered here? Can I focus on the other for a second? We're all guilty of it. I'm guilty of it, you're guilty of it, where we don't see the need of the other right in front of us. And so we have to struggle to make sure that we stop and see the needs of the other. This happens in your home. I'm not saying you need to have a beggar at your door. It can be a husband, a wife, a child, again, a friend, people that are close to us. You don't have to go looking for needs. They're out there. Second thing I'm going to ask you to do this week, take the parable again and pray over it every day. Read it again and again and see what speaks to you. See what jumps out to you. Read it once, read it twice, read it 3 times, meditate on it, spend time with it, and see if anything grabs you, motivates you, makes you want to change, because that's the point of the parable. I want to change my life. I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be someone so mired in my own creature comforts and my own pleasures that I don't see the needs of another. That's a challenge. Third thing, silence. We all need more silence. That's how the devil does it. There's a great, I love this work by C.S. Lewis called The Screw Tape Letters. If you've never read them, they're really interesting. It goes back to the 40s when he's writing letters. He himself is writing a letter as if he is a master devil training a younger devil on how to deceive somebody. And in it, at one point, he comes out clearly and says, your technique is not to have powerful things and do all this other stuff. The one real power that the devil has is that of deception. Just get him to focus on other things. Just get your subject to not pay attention to Jesus. That's all he asks. He says, if you can do this, you'll win every time. Because once they focus on Jesus, it's like the light coming on in a dark room. Once I focus on Jesus, I realize what my sins are. I realize where I need to grow. I realize how fooled I was by one of the deadly sins. That's all the devil wants. Just don't pay attention to Jesus, and guess what? That'll wind you up in hell. So more quiet time, maybe slip into a church. Just sit quietly in the pew 15, 20 minutes, a half hour, whatever you can afford. Just sit quietly before the Lord. Allow that light to come into your heart and recognize where the brokenness really is. And then let the Lord, through His grace, help you to overcome it. If there's something in which you need to repent, go to confession. It's a great sacrament. I go all the time. Go to confession. Do something about it. Don't just sit there mired in it. Get the advice of a spiritual person. Go to a priest. Find a friend who you think is trustworthy and ask them, how do we do this? How do we overcome it? Next week, we're going to wrap this series up, and it's a powerful conclusion because Jesus is going to talk about that servant that only did what he was supposed to do, flashing back to the older brother that stayed home in the parable. I'm just a useless servant who only did what I was supposed to do. Well, what am I supposed to do? The works of mercy. And so we'll focus a little bit more on how we can change ourselves, not being focused just on the sin, but on what we need to change. And what we need to change is our hearts. We need to see the other as other and love them as other, no matter where they're at, no matter who they are. And to stop using reason as a way to blow somebody off or to kick somebody out or to not pay attention to somebody. And so in that silence, try turning off the world a little bit more while you do it. Try turning off the TV sets and turning off the radios and turning off all those things that are poisoning our minds with information, like the young man who had to fight back against his own professor so that his mind wouldn't be poisoned by the philosophy that he was going to teach. Don't allow the philosophy of this world to steal your salvation from you and from your loved ones. Love them by helping them overcome their weakness. Love them by praying for them, strengthening them, and advising them. And when someone comes to you to strengthen and advise you, listen in love, because they're there to help. God bless you.